I had someone tweet at me the other day asking why I haven't mentioned tight end as a position of need for the Carolina Panthers. I have, but we haven't spoken about it in recent weeks. So let's go ahead and talk about tight end as a need and whether the Panthers will finally address that position next week in the draft.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Your team every day. That's what we do here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Subscribe or follow the show for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council, because here on Fridays throughout the offseason, I'm answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions either at me or DM me. But of course, follow me first on Twitter at Julian Council to get your questions in for this week's edition of the weekly Friday mailbag. And by the way, the draft is next week, so probably your last chance to ask me mailbag questions before the beginning of the 2024 NFL Draft. Today's episode of Locked On Panthers is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started today. We are just over a week away from the 2024 NFL Draft starting up in Detroit, Michigan. The Carolina Panthers will be on the clock, 33rd overall on Friday evening, and I cannot wait to finally get there. And I've enjoyed this draft season. The Panthers have a lot of needs. You have Dan Morgan taking over as the GM, Brant Tillis coming over as a cap guy, working on contracts. Now Dave Canales as a head coach. So it's been an interesting offseason, a fun free agency period, and a fun draft season as we try to figure out what the Panthers are going to do. First round, you can pretty much know what the answer is going to be. Now, last year, there's a big debate about whether it's going to be Bryce or it's going to be CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson, maybe Will Levis. And we got to this point in time and knew it was going to be Bryce Young. We're sitting here knowing really nothing at all about what the Panthers are going to do at 33 because there are 32 other teams picking before them, or I guess technically 32 other picks being taken before they even get on the clock, unless they want to trade up into the first round. And someone asked me about that a couple weeks ago, and we'll talk about a particular player who the Panthers may want to do that for, who plays a tight end position. So on today's show, let's get in to the tight end, because we know the Panthers have a great need there at the tight end position. So much so where I was tweeted at over the weekend by James Lyerly Jr. on Twitter asking me, why is tight end not mentioned as a need? Our Panthers tight end room is lackluster, in all caps, at best. That's what James had to say to me on Twitter. And I responded, where don't they have a need? We talked about wide receiver as a need. We've talked about edge. We have talked about center. We have spent a ton of time here on Locked On Panthers over the last couple of weeks talking about all the needs this team has, which is why I have said this is a rebuild. It's going to take a little bit of time. It's great the Panthers have gone out there and they brought in Jadeveon Clowney and they brought in DJ Woonem to fill the holes that were left there at edge. It's great they brought in Dane Jackson to come in and to compete for the starting job. Great what they did at wide receiver, trading for Deontay Johnson. All well and good, but there's still needs at each of those three positions, including linebacker, tight end, safety down the line. This team has a boatload of needs. When it comes to tight end, though, the question the Panthers have to ask themselves is this: do we have a tight end one on the roster? I don't think so. And I hate to disturb Tremble Hive out there. I don't think your guy is that. Now, looking back at last season, Tommy Tremble turned out to be the best tight end on the Panthers roster. And because that was a fact, that was very disappointing for the Panthers' offensive outlook, as Hayden Hurst did not prove to be the guy we thought he was going to be, especially after week one, when he was honestly the only positive receiving threat in that game against Atlanta and caught Bryce Young's first touchdown, then chucked it in the stands. Thankfully, they got the football back, but that should have been an omen of how the season was going to go when Hayden Hurst got a little bit too excited and tossed away Bryce Young's first career touchdown. And we know there was not a lot of touchdowns after that happened that season. But looking at Tommy Tremble's stats in 2023, 32 targets, 23 receptions, 194 yards, and 3 touchdowns. That does not necessarily spell out tight end one. But here's some positives, though. 50% receiving success rate when the Panthers threw the ball to him, and a 71.9 catch percentage. That was the highest among all players on the team. So good for Tommy Tremble in that respect. So you're probably saying to me, Julian, that's his overall numbers, but what was his numbers when Hayden Hurst wasn't out there for those 7 games last season? Well, I'm glad that you asked. He had 20 targets, 12 receptions, 121 yards, and 1 touchdown in the 7 games that Hayden Hurst did not play last season due to a concussion that he suffered midway through the season. So Tommy Tremble, even in those games, didn't particularly put up big numbers. But then you can probably ask me, how about you take the averages from those games and then multiply it by a 17-game season and then tell me what the numbers are had Tommy Tremble been tight end 1 all season long and not having his snaps taken away by Hayden Hurst in the first couple of games of the season. Sure, I'll do that. If you take the averages of that 7-game span, times it by 17, assuming Tommy Tremble stays healthy, which he has done so far in his career, he would have had 29 receptions for 293 yards, and that's still not great. Now, the touchdown, he had 17 touchdowns. I don't think it's fair to put the 17 touchdowns, but that'd be a hell of a number if he could have 29 receptions, 17 of them were touchdowns at 293 yards. But looking at the receptions and yardage for Tommy Tremble, that still does not spell out to me tight end 1. I just don't think he's that guy. But can he give me a really good tight end 2 for the Panthers when they eventually get a tight end 1? Absolutely. And Tommy Tremble's a player past this season I want to see stay in Carolina because I do think he helps him when it comes to run blocking. And his numbers, according to Pro Football Focus, don't necessarily spell that out. But we watch the games. We see that Tommy Tremble is an asset in the run game for the Panthers. And now, especially with Icky there at left tackle, bringing in Damian Lewis at left guard, they're going to be great on the left side. Put Tommy Tremble over there. Put him on the right side with Robert Hunt. With Taylor Moton, you're going to be great there. I think Tommy Tremble is an asset for this roster. I just don't think Tommy Tremble is a tight end 1, a guy who's going to be a threat in the passing game. On the run game, certainly. As a number 2 option, maybe he can put up about 30 receptions, 300 yards in a season. I would love to see that. I don't think he's going to be a guy who's going to go out there and have 50 catches for 600, 700 yards. I just don't think that's who Tommy Tremble is. And that's totally fine. You can still believe in him as a player, as an asset for the offense, which I do, while also recognizing that, yeah, he's not necessarily that guy who's going to be a stud tight end for the Panthers or any of the 32 teams in the NFL. That's just my opinion. His career stats say that he has 62 receptions, 548 yards, and 7 touchdowns. That's a season for even the middle tier tight ends in the NFL. That's what he's done in his career. Now, he had mentioned last year during OTAs, during Matt Rule's tenure, he had never been really taught how to run routes. And this is a player at Notre Dame that wasn't really a pass-catching tight end anyways. So to come in the NFL to not get that development, you wonder how far beyond is he where he should be currently. Now with Dave Canales coming in and the expectation that they're going to want to utilize the tight end, even more so than what we saw last year where we thought Frank Reich and his offense was going to utilize the tight end. We've seen Cade Otton go from a player who was not used that much in Tampa to a player who had a solid season. Okay, Otton back in Washington was a high-level pass-catching tight end. Understand that. But Tommy Tremble hasn't really gotten that much coaching to be that. Now, with another offseason of coaching, getting into that tight end run role as of right now, could he have that breakout year? Possibly. But a breakout to me is 30 receptions, 300 yards, and maybe 5 touchdowns. I'm not looking at multiplying those numbers and having to have 60 receptions, 600, 700 yards, and then just short of 10 touchdowns in a season. I just don't think that's what Tommy Tremble is going to do. When you look at the rest of the roster as well, Ian Thomas, we know who he is at this point in time, looked good as far as promising in his first 2 seasons. Then once Rule came around and Reich, his numbers went all the way down to the basement. He played 12 games last year, 5 receptions, 56 yards, and matched his career low, 27% snap count. He was not thought of as someone that was going to help that team, even when they were losing a ton of games, and I can't really argue against it. Stephon Sullivan, he's going to be interesting to watch. He did start his career in Seattle under Dave Canales and a lot of these guys who are now here in Carolina. Last season, 12 receptions, 125 yards, so showed a lot more than Ian Thomas in less games. I'm curious to see what his role is going to be. He is way more of a pass catcher, played wide receiver at LSU, then has had to transition to tight end, which has been difficult for him. And it's difficult for anybody coming from college as a wide receiver to a tight end. Yes, you have to block as a receiver in college, but that's on the outside. Having to go on the inside, go up against some bigger dudes, that is a difficult thing to do and to be asked of. And so far, Stephon Sullivan has done it to a very middling level, but he has shown a little bit of promise when it comes to being a pass catcher. So we'll see what role he has as he's been retained by this staff as he did start off his career in Seattle. So tight end 1, I don't see one on the roster. I do see a tight end 2 and a good, valuable player in Tommy Tremble. Ian Thomas, don't really feel that highly about him after the 6 years now we've seen of him in Carolina. And then Stephon Sullivan. Curious to see how that works out with him this season. So looking at that, is it worth the Panthers trading up for a tight end, and in particular, Brock Bowers? I was asked about this a couple of weeks ago. I want to discuss it again for anyone who missed that show. Let's talk about it. Should the Panthers trade up for Brock Bowers? Yes or no? We'll talk about it here in just a moment on Locked on Panthers. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning a championship is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. I do not see a tight end 1 on this roster right now. And that's not to say that Tommy Tremble or Ian Thomas, by the grace of God, or Stephon Sullivan, all of a sudden become a true tight end 1 for the Panthers and at this NFL level. I just don't think it's going to happen. I don't think the talent is there right now. And Tremble Hive, I think your boy's good. I think he's a valuable player. Just don't think he's what the Panthers necessarily need as their tight end 1 for the future. Right now, could it be good enough? Possibly. But we'll have to see how things play out. I think the Panthers, like many of you, should still be on the hunt for a tight end once the draft comes around. And it's disappointing when you look back at free agency. The Panthers weren't able to get Will Dissly or Colby Parkinson or Noah Fant staying there in Seattle, Parkinson going down to LA, and same thing with Dissly, both of them going to the Rams and Chargers respectively. And of those three, it really felt like Parkinson would have been the guy to come to Carolina. 6'7", great size. Him being a player who had shown that he can be a solid pass catcher. But if he got more reps as a number 1, and he's a great run blocker as well, it looked like the Panthers could have had someone who could have been a consistent 500-yard reception tight end for them in Parkinson. Now, you would rather have what we had in the past of Greg Olsen, have a guy who could be a 1,000-yard receiver. But we also have to understand, when Greg was doing that, what did the Panthers wide receiver room look like during that time? Didn't really matter because Cam Newton was quarterback. They could run the football, and this team was winning a lot of games and going to the playoffs. But it'd be nice now with the wide receiver room that still needs to have some added pieces to it for there to be a tight end who could supplement what that passing game could look like for the Panthers until they can truly find that number 1 and then find someone who can replace Thielen once he likely departs after this season. It would be nice to have a tight end 1 who can be a big part of this offense in the pass game, which has not been the case since Matt Rule graced our presence here in Carolina, and really even before that when Greg Olsen was having his foot injuries. So with that all being said, should the Panthers trade up for Brock Bowers? I was asked about this in the weekly Friday mailbag a couple weeks ago, and I thought about it. I looked at the NFL trade value chart, and I did not see it as making a ton of sense. The Panthers, looking at the chart, their 2 second-round picks, 33 and 39, they basically equal pick 14 and 15 in the first round. So they could trade up, and they would be trading up for what would be a mid-first round pick. That's what those 2 picks together are worth. Now, to get up into the first round, they would have to then part ways with also like a day 3 pick to get up there and potentially get a player like Brock Bowers. Now, when I look at Brock Bowers, Matt Miller, Field Yates, Mel Kiper Jr., all of ESPN have done their respective mock drafts, and all 3 of them had Brock Bowers going 10th overall to the New York Jets. So with that in mind, the Panthers are going to have to trade early into the top 10 in order to get Brock Bowers. Now, they're not getting their number 1 overall pick back, and it would be insane to trade up to get Brock Bowers number 1 overall. We're looking at the back end of the top 10 of the draft. The Panthers are going to somehow be able to facilitate a trade by giving up their second-round picks this year and then a day 3 pick either this year or probably next year in the draft. And understand, their second-round pick next year belongs to the Chicago Bears. Their first-round pick belongs to them next year. You don't want to give up that, obviously, just to go get a tight end, to be honest with you. Brock Bowers may turn out to be a Hall of Famer, an outstanding player. I just, in principle, cannot think of that making a lot of sense for the Panthers right now when there are so many needs. And that's the big thing about trading up. If you give up 2 second-round picks plus a future day 3 or a day 3 this year, you're limiting your ability to help your roster in multiple areas. And that's the big reason why whenever anyone asks me, should they trade into the first round? I just don't think it makes a lot of sense. Like, if you do that, that player better be an instant impact player and a stud. Much like if you trade up to number 1 and give up what the Panthers gave up, that player needs to be an instant impact player and be a stud. And so far, Bryce has not been that. Now, we know there are reasons why, looking at the coaching staff that was around him, the roster that was around him, that limited his potential, but still, he has a long way to go to show that he was worth what the Panthers gave up to go up to number 1. And in all likelihood, when you do that, it's very hard for that player to actually be worth it, especially when you think of all of the other players you could have had, opposed to just taking that one singular player at that point in time. Same kind of case here. And that's not me saying that Bryce is not going to be worth it. We just have to wait and see. But same case here, just thinking on principle, that's going to be very difficult for Brock Bowers to really live up to being what the Panthers would be willing to give up for him, just based off of what you missed out on as well. Now, can you be overly consumed on what you missed out on? Yes, no, maybe so. But looking at this, I just don't think it makes a lot of sense for the Panthers to trade up in the first round, especially for a tight end. If they're going to do it for a wide receiver. But I still don't think they should do it, knowing that we've had conversations of receiver still being a need, center being a need, edge being a need, tight end, which we're having conversation today, being a need, corner is a need, safety, if you really look at it, could be a need next year, maybe not right now, linebackers a need. There are needs all across this roster outside the offensive line at this point in time. You don't need to be giving up draft picks to go just get one singular player, even if he is as good as Brock Bowers. And looking at the teams that you'd have to trade up with, the Bears, they're sitting there right at 9 ahead of the Jets. You've obviously done a trade with Chicago in the past. That's what led you to get Bryce Young and DJ Moore leaving and not having number 1 overall pick in this year's draft. The Panthers obviously could absolutely use, and not to take a player, but to have traded back, because Caleb Williams is up there, and they would have gotten a king's ransom, and they would be in a great position this year in the draft and in future years in the draft had that been the case. But it's not the case. That's not a reality. Now, the Bears are going to take Caleb Williams number 1. We all know that. At 9, the expectation is they're going to take a wide receiver. Do the Bears trade back and not help Caleb, or they stay there and help Caleb and do what smart teams do and surround their quarterback with weapons, which they've done so far this offseason? I'm thinking the Bears are probably not going to be that interested, and the Panthers don't really have much to give them because the Bears have already gotten what they needed out of Carolina at this point in time. The Falcons are at 8, so you know that's not going to happen. The Titans are at 7. The Titans are a team that are expected to go out there and get a tackle. I don't see a team that's going to be willing to make that trade, and the Jets themselves, they're in win-now mode. They're trying to load up around Aaron Rodgers. They've done an offensive line this offseason. I don't think they're going to trade. So I don't even think a trade up for Brock Bowers is realistic to get in position to where you would need to take him just based off of the things I've seen. But here's the thing, too, about it. Why trade up for Brock Bowers when you could just stay where you're at 33, at 39, and maybe even 65 and get Ja'Tavion Sanders out of Texas? Like, why chase after Brock Bowers when Ja'Tavion Sanders exists? And if you don't know who that is, he's a tight end out of Texas who last year helping the Longhorns win the Big 12, get to the playoff, 45 receptions, 662 yards, 2 touchdowns in 2023. Looking at his 2 seasons, the last 2 at Texas combined, 99 receptions, 1,295 yards, 7 touchdowns. In the 2 years where he really played at Texas. Did not play his first year, but the last 2 seasons, been one of the best tight ends in college football, arguably the second best behind Brock Bowers. And in the draft, he's valued as the second best tight end on the board. Now, looking at a couple big boards, PFF has him 51st on their big board. That would make him a second-round pick. I looked at Field Yates. His mock draft had him going 63rd overall. Matt Miller, who is a Texas fan, by the way, had Ja'Tavion Sanders going 69th overall in his 7th-round mock. Mel Kiper Jr., I don't think he had him at all in day 1. He didn't have him day 1, but he did not have him in the 2nd round. So he would be available day 3. Looking at it, like, Sanders is a player who you probably don't take at 33, probably don't take at 39, just looking at the positional value there. But when you get to 65, the beginning of the third round, it's possible that he's on the board there, as Yates has him going at 63, right there at the tail end of the second round, and Miller has him going at 69. And it looks like Mel Kiper Jr., we haven't seen a full 7-round mock. I don't think he's going to do one of those. He doesn't have him going in the second round. So if Sanders is there at 65, and that's clearly a need, why trade up for Brock Bowers? That's my question. And it's not like Jatavion Sanders is a complete tight end like Brock Bowers. He's not great when it comes to blocking right now. And when he gets into his career early on, when he's on the field, it would be pretty obvious what the offense is trying to do, at least early on. But he's someone that you develop. And that's the point of coaching, is to develop the players. And the Panthers have done a poor job developing. And my hope is now with this coaching staff that somebody like Jatavion Sanders will be developed to be a better blocker. But you already have guys who can do that. You got Tremble who can do it. You have Thomas who can do that. Stephon Sullivan, no, he can't do that. But you can find dudes on the street to be blockers. You can't find a lot of dudes out there to be high-level pass catchers, which I think Jatavion Sanders will be once he gets to the NFL. I've seen Joe Person of The Athletic mock him to Carolina at 101. I don't know about that. I love Joe. I think Joe does a great job. I just look at what the other true draft analysts are looking at, and they don't think that he's going to be there at 101. And the big boards suggest he won't be there. And the big boards aren't necessarily what's exactly going to happen. It's not necessarily he's going to be taken at 51, but that's just where they value him as a day 2 pick, either in a second or third round. I don't think he's going to be a day 3 pick. That is a player that the Panthers, if they want him, they're going to have to get him probably at 65. Maybe they trade back from 39 and get him late into the second round. But why give up the farm, which really wouldn't be the farm? It'd be a part of the farm because you already gave up the farm last year. Why give up your other property for Brock Bowers when you could just sit there and take Jatavion Sanders out of Texas? That's the question I have for anyone who's asking, should they trade up for Brock Bowers? Now, looking at tight end, we talked about it. Wide receivers a need, corners a need, centers a need, edge, all these needs. Where does it currently rank as a need? And when are the Panthers probably, or at least more likely, to take a tight end in the draft next week? We'll talk about that here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. We've all been there before, either as a player or a fan. It's halftime and the scoreboard is not looking good. You're feeling low, not sure if you or your team can pull out a win. That's when you dig deep, lift your head up and say to yourself, time to get back in the game, pull off some bank heists and take as much of your friends' money as I possibly can. That's right. The smash hit mobile game Monopoly Go lets you compete with your friends to get the most riches and build the biggest empire. It's Monopoly you love, but on your phone anytime, with tons of new twists, including leaderboards to compare your progress to your buddies. So there's so much to do. Play on countless dynamic Monopoly boards. Make your friends bankrupt by smashing the landmarks or wrecking balls. Charge other players rent for your iconic properties. You can even work with your friends to crack open community chests and in tournaments to get extra rewards and climb the leaderboard. So get back out there, put on your game face, and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play Store. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. And right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150. Win or lose does not matter. Just put that bet down and get that bonus money over at FanDuel. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that's safe, secure, and easy to use. What are you waiting for? Seriously, get to it. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So I don't think there's a tight end one on the roster right now, and that's fine. Tommy Tremble, good player. Add a player like Jatavion Sanders, they're at 65, or maybe you trade back from 39 later on in the second round, take him in the 50s, or right there again at the beginning of the third round, pair him with Tremble, bring back Ian Thomas, who does have experience, so there is some value there. And a Panthers tight end room still not great, but it's in a better spot, especially looking long-term to have the pairing of Sanders for the next 4 years, and hopefully you can bring back Tommy Tremble as that pass-blocking tight end, and then a guy who continues to develop as a pass catcher, but as a number 2 tight end. And I like where the Panthers tight end room could be headed moving forward. That makes more sense to me than giving up pick 33 and 39, and likely another pick to get Brock Bowers in the top 10. The Panthers, they don't have a top 10 pick this year. It sucks. They do not need to give up any more capital to get up into the top 10. And why is that? Because they have a lot of needs. And looking at the needs right now, because I'm just thinking to myself, where is tight end among the list of needs as far as just ranking them? I still look at wide receiver as a top need for the Panthers, as a primary need, which I want to see them do at 33. And all the reporting that I've seen out there from like David Newton, from Joe Person, from a lot of people, is the Panthers are expected to still be aggressive in finding a wide receiver at 33, right there, right at the spot to start off day 2 of the NFL draft. They want a receiver. So looking at that, center then feels like a position that I think they should go after as well. There's guys like Zach Frazier out of West Virginia we've talked about. I don't think Graham Barton out of Duke's going to be available, but apparently Jackson Powers-Johnson is expected to be available now, day 2. If that's the case, I'm going to have a hard time passing on him at 33 because I'm just going to be sweating those next couple picks so they get to 39. But if he's there at 39 after they take a wide receiver at 33, go get that man, and he could be your starter maybe right away. At the very least, quality depth for Austin Corbett and for your offensive line, which the Panthers are still in need of. And I think they have it now with Brady Christensen stepping back, and you brought in Josh Nyman as a swing tackle, and you have guys like Cade Mays and Zavala who do have experience, Nash Jensen as well. They have experience playing. You don't want to see them play, but they at least have the experience. Then if you have to push back Corbett, that's a solid offensive line, you would think, with Jackson Powers-Johnson there at center. So look at wide receiver, look at center, corner, still a big-time need. I would think the preference right now from a lot of people would be to take a center there at 39 maybe, or even at 65. They don't do it in the second round, but to go out there to get someone who can come in, compete with Dane Jackson, be able to be a starter, potentially at least be your third corner where you have Troy Hill in as a nickel. And this is a cornerback market in the draft this year, especially in Mike Sanderstrail, who make a lot of sense as slot corner guys. The Panthers could get one of those in the third round, maybe in the second round. We'll see. I know they always liked length when Scott Fitter was here, and I don't think that's really changed that much with Dan Morgan having been in Seattle and now here as a general manager. We'll see how that all works out. I would think that they'd be trying to get a center or at least a cornerback also before looking at some of the other positions. Now, edge rusher and linebacker, those are two spots of the Panthers. They got starters this year. You have edge with Jadeveon Clowney coming in. He's going to be a starter this year, maybe even next year. Same thing with DJ Wooden. He's going to start this year, maybe next season if he plays well enough. You could have that position solidified as far as who your two starters are for the next 2 years. So are you really in a rush to take a edge rusher in a second round or in a third round? If that player is just going to be another rotational body, you have Kayvon Chason, who's coming in. He's a former first-round pick. Maybe it finally clicks for him. We'll see if that happens this year. Of course, they have DJ Johnson, who they took last year. He's a project, but this is year 2 of the project and year 2 of being in a Ejiro Evero scheme. And Ejiro was a guy who really liked DJ Johnson and implored the Panthers to get him. And they went out there and did it, and he rewarded him with a goose egg. But again, project. We'll see how it looks like this year. They took Amari Barno 2 years ago. Maybe this season he can add more. They've done things to the edge rusher room for the Panthers. They don't necessarily have to go out there and get someone, and that's something that I've kind of woken up to over the last couple of weeks when just looking at the other needs on this roster. Linebacker, you have Shaq for this season, probably his last year in Carolina as a free agent after this year. Then you look also at Josie Jewell. He's probably here for the next 2 seasons. Would be nice to get a linebacker to come in, maybe a Peyton Wilson, who could come in and be a rotational guy this year and then be your long-term starter in the middle of your defense. And tight ends kind of similar, where in a way you have a starter, Tommy. Of course, you have Ian Thomas who can play for you. You have Stephon Sullivan. They're really missing another body. They need it more so than edge. And I would say more so than linebacker, like tight end really needs another body. So I'm looking at wide receiver right now, center, corner, and then tight end as the 4th biggest need on this roster. Now, looking at that as the 4th biggest need, if you just go based off of how the Panthers are going to draft, so they go wide receiver at 33, they take center at 39, corner at 65. The next pick available for them would be 101, the first pick in the 4th round to begin day 3. Looking at the players that would be available then, just based off of PFF Big Board, you have Eric All out of Iowa. You know how I love Iowa tight ends. He's actually a Michigan tight end who then transferred to Iowa. Those are both great places to play tight end at, especially what Jim Harbaugh's able to do with those guys last couple seasons. So they have him. available would be great. Cade Stover out of Ohio State would be available. Ben Sinnott out of Kansas State, and then Theo Johnson out of Penn State. I saw a guy like Jaheim Bell out of Florida State who was also available probably around that time. So pick 101 would seem to be maybe the earliest, unless they want Ja'Tavion Sanders. But it feels like the earliest Panthers would really be targeting a tight end. And if they are, of those names I mentioned, Cade Stover's the guy. Cade Stover has potential to be a tight end one, maybe not the best athlete, but a great pass catcher, really good blocker in the run game. He's someone comes from Ohio State. As we know, they put out some solid players there over the years, the decades, man. And I would look at those three, or those four rather, and I would want Cade Stover to come in because I think he comes in and he helps his team out immediately. Just like Ja'Tavion Sanders, who I think is a better athlete, certainly a better pass catcher, but has a ways to go when it comes to being a run blocker. And I don't think like that's the kind of thing you're super concerned about immediately. What the Panthers are concerned about is getting more weapons around Bryce and having impact players. And that would be an impact player in Ja'Tavion Sanders. And I also believe that Cade Stover will be an impact player for the Carolina Panthers as well if the Panthers take him at 101. I'll pick 141, 142. They could also go tight in there. I would love to see him at 65 if they could take Sanders. But if he's not on the board, then you're focused on a corner. If he is on the board, then maybe you're pushing back the need for corner. And then there is going to be questions there, as we talked about last week, that being quite possibly the most volatile position on the roster when someone asked me about that on the weekly Friday mailback. And speaking of corners, we'll get into more about the quarterback position here in Carolina tomorrow on the show as we look ahead to the 2024 NFL draft. But that's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. Again, y'all subscribe or follow the show for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter, at Julian Council, where on Friday, I'll be back to answer your weekly Friday mailbag questions, either at me or DM me. But of course, follow me first on Twitter, at Julian Council, to get those questions into me now. But in the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole, as always, and forever keep pounding. And I'll talk to y'all on Tuesday.